kids, so in this unit, we're going to learn how to identify an author's point of view with the use of pronouns. So we've discussed pronouns in the past, so we do know that those are words used to replace nouns. So examples of pronouns are I, me, we, he, she, it, they. Depending on what pronoun is used, that's going to help us identify what point of view a narrative is being told in. So today we're going to focus on understanding the concept of first-person perspective. So I'm going to use the word perspective and point of view interchangeably because they mean the same thing. So we're going to work together to break down the details of this concept. In doing so, we're going to use what is called a concept diagram. This is part of the concept mastery content enhancement routine. So this is going to help us break down the key words and the characteristics of first-person point of view, and it will help us gain a better understanding of how to identify it in literature. So please follow along on your handouts and fill them in as we go. You can use this tool in other classrooms to help understand other concepts. So definitely keep it as a point of reference and ask any questions if you have them along the way. So we're going to start. So the first step in the process is to convey the concept. So our concept today is first person point of view. I've already written that in. And as you see, as we go along, there are 7 steps and there are 7 letters in the word concept diagram. So this whole idea uses the first letter of each step as a way to memorize it. So the first part, like I said, is to convey the concept. The targeted concept for today is first person point of view or first person perspective. The second part is the overall concept, and that is narrative perspective. So narrative perspective or point of view is the perspective from which a story is told. In other words, who's telling the story. So first person point of view is one example of narrative perspectives. There's also second person point of view, third person limited, third person omniscient, but today we'll be focusing again on how to identify first person point of view. So our overall perspective we have in there, I'd like you to fill that in. And then we move on to noting the key words. So what words do you think of when I say first person point of view or point of view?
Who is it told by?
Okay, so what's another word for that would be a narrator, right? So we can write narrator. Who it is told by. Okay, so that's kind of keeping perspectives in. I kind of want to focus in on our first person perspective. So like I said, we understand that pronouns are used to replace nouns. Personal pronouns or first person personal pronouns are going to be ones that you're using if you are telling the story. So like I, me, mine are first person personal pronouns. So I'm going to write a keyword would be pronouns and first person is what we're focusing on. So I, me, my, we. Okay. Some other keywords. So if the narrator uses these first person personal pronouns, what does that mean? Is the narrator a character in the story?
Yes.
Okay. So usually we would, if we hear those, or if we are reading those words, the narrator is a character in the story. So another keyword could be character, or is participating in the story. So participant in the story. And at this point, the narrator would be offering their version or their account of events. So, personal account of events. Okay, so this is a pretty good start. The next step in the process is to classify these characteristics. So getting, based off of our keywords, we have a good start. Let's try to identify which terms from our list belong in the always present column. So this is going to be if the narrator is a character in the story, if the narrator is a character in the story, it's being told in the first person point of view. Do we all agree that this is true?
Yes.
Okay. So the always present characteristic would be narrator is a character. Okay. How do we know the narrator is a participant of the story? What type of pronouns help us identify the narrator as a character?
First person pronouns.
Okay, so exactly what we said over here, one of the keywords is always present means that it's going to be using first person pronouns. So first person pronouns. Okay. Okay. So another one of the always present would be that they're a participant. So we said the narrator is a character, so that works. And that means that they're providing their personal account of events in the story. And that's always going to be present as the first person point of view with the narrator. Personal account of events. Okay, so we haven't discussed second person point of view or third person point of view. So for this purposes, I filled that in already for you, and we'll discuss that later on in the unit, how to identify the use of second person pronouns, which would be addressing the reader as you, the use of third person pronouns, he, she, it, they. That's just talking about, that would be the character being expressed. So the narrator is talking or telling a story about somebody else, and so they're using pronouns he, she, it, or they. They're not telling their own story. Or if the main character is named, saying, not using a pronoun to replace the name, and you know that the name of the character is being told, and it is not I. So we know that the narrator is not telling the story. So those are going to be never present characteristics, because that's not what we know that won't be told in first person point of view. Sometimes present, another thing that we could kind of think of is direct insight into thoughts. So if the narrator is telling the story, you'll get direct insight into their thoughts, but that's not always going to be the case. They may just be telling kind of specific details of a story, but not be giving their personal thoughts or opinions about it. So that's sometimes present, but not always present, because they don't need to always offer that in first person perspective. So let's look at some examples of first person point of view. So these examples must include all of the always present characteristics we just discussed. So this example of first person narration is kind of a lower level reading one, but it's a good one to note. So the cat in the hat. I'll kind of read you a little excerpt and we can decide together. The sun did not shine, it was too wet to play, so we sat in the house all that cold, cold, wet day. I sat there with Sally, we sat there, we two. I said, how I wish we had something to do. So how do we know that this is an example of first person perspective? Because the narrator is a character in the story he's telling. The words that help us identify that the story is being told in first person perspective are these first person pronouns. So we heard the word we, he said I, etc. So one of the examples would be cat in the hat. So that's kind of an easy one for us to review an example of. Another example is a great one that we had worked through with our younger students when we were reading, and they really liked the rhyming of this book. So this example, I'll work through the night to create a design, constantly analyze, tweak, and refine. I'll study jet engines and look at old planes, contemplate buses and zeppelins and trains, to make it as smooth and as sleek as an eel. I will borrow ideas from the Wienermobile. So what first-person pronouns can we identify from that passage?
Me and I.
Yep. I'll work, I will work. Yep, exactly. So we'll write that as an example. And that's from the book, If I Built a Car. And even in the title there, we can see if I built a car. I is used in the title even, so we know that he's telling the story. A non-example of first-person perspective would be Charlotte's Web, which we just read. We do know that, well, I'll reread the first line of the story, and I would like you to tell me why this is not first-person point of view. "Where's Papa going with that axe?" said Fern to her mother as they were sitting at the table for breakfast. As they were setting the table for breakfast, So how do we know this story is not told in first-person point of view? Which words help identify that, or help us identify that? Fern's name is noted, and then she also said, or it also said, she asked, Fern said to her mother as they were setting the table for breakfast. So as they were setting the table, that's a third person pronoun. So we'll get to that again, but it's not using first person pronouns. So that is a non-example. All right. So the next step in this would be to practice with a new example. If you can think of an example of, another example of first-person point of view, you want to consider the characteristics that are always present. And then you can give me an example or a non-example if you'd like. I'll give you a little bit of time to do that. Who can tell me what they came up with?
I can.
Okay, Marla. What did you have for an example or a non-example?
Well, we just read Matilda. Matilda is a non-example because it talks about Matilda saying she and her.
That's good. Okay, so you're saying the narrator says words like she and her, which we know are not examples of first-person pronouns. That's very good, Marla. So we'll add that to the non-examples list. You can add that to your diagrams as well. Okay, and then the final step of the concept diagram sequence is to tie down a definition. So now that we've identified the characteristics and the examples, we're gonna come up with something together to define what first-person point of view or first-person narratives are. So we need to remember what makes a good definition. It must be a full sentence. It doesn't have to be just one sentence, but we want to keep it as short and concise as possible. It needs to include the targeted concept and the overall concept. So in our definition, we want to make sure that we're noting those two. And then it needs to include all of our always present characteristics, because those are the things that identify what we just came up with. So I think that a good way to start this would be, so let's identify our first concept. That's important, right? So what is that? What is that? Anyone?
First person point of view.
Okay, so first person point of view, which is what we're trying to define. First person point of view is a
narrative perspective.
Is a narrative perspective. Okay, good. So now we have both of those included so far. And now we just have to include these always present characteristics in it. So to make it kind of concise, we could say, First person point of view is a narrative perspective in which the narrator is a participant in the story. So that's like a first kind of like overall defining it, but if we want to get a little bit more detailed and offer the other always present things, we could just add one more sentence. We could say, in this mode of storytelling, the narrator uses what kind of pronouns?
First person.
Good job. Uses first person pronouns. So make sure you're writing this down because this will be kind of our final step here, such as, we'll include those, such as I, me, mine, we, you. Okay, so we have those taken care of. Personal account of events. So uses first person pronouns such as I, me, mine, we to about relay his or her personal account of events. Okay, so that includes all the always present characteristics and kind of puts it into two descriptive sentences for us. The use of this diagram has helped us be able to kind of understand this overall concept of narrative perspectives, and we'll continue to move through these other narrative perspectives and further along in the unit. But now we have a good idea. We have a definition locked down for the first person point of view, and by breaking it down this way, you've been able to understand it fully. I could have very easily just told you the definition of first person perspective, but having you involved in the process of coming up with the different words that you kind of already knew, you had those in the back of your brain from previous experience, and then applying them to a new concept. So that's the full idea of the concept diagram, is being able to break it down and work through something so you have a greater understanding in the end, versus me just telling you. That's not going to be very helpful in the end of things. So it's given us the opportunity to break down the concept to understand it more completely. Using the linking steps, which are each of the 7 steps in concept. You are active participants in establishing our definition of first person point of view. So I think it's important that you guys were all involved in that, and now you have a good guideline for ways to study in other courses too, and for you to better understand other concepts. It's a great tool for using to understand kind of bigger picture concepts. So I'd like you to keep this concept diagram to reference, and if you want some more blank ones, I can print those out for you as well so you can use them for other classes if need be. And then just kind of a review. So now we know what first person point of view in literature is and how to identify it using first person pronouns. So we discussed the examples and non-examples, and you gave a great example. We just finished reading Matilda, and that is a great non-example, excuse me. So the non-examples we found today will help us as we move forward in this unit, because we will discuss other narrative perspectives, as I said, and how to identify them. So I gave you those never present characteristics because we haven't discussed them yet, but you were able to kind of figure that out, and with your non-example of Matilda, we know that that was using third person pronouns. You said that the narrator referred to Matilda as she or her. So moving forward, these non-examples will give us the opportunity to work through those other narrative perspectives. Overall, I think you guys did really great with this lesson, and I hope that you have a better understanding of narrative perspectives, particularly our focus today, first person point of view. And I really hope that the concept diagram gave you kind of a cool way of learning a new idea. Great job today, guys.